The hidden truth. The manila envelope slid across the polished conference table, stopping at CEO Elaine Mercer's manicured fingertips. Confusion rippled across her face as she looked up at Marco Reyes, the company's head janitor, a man she'd passed 1,000 times but never truly seen until today. His weathered hands trembled slightly, but his eyes remained steady, determined. The boardroom fell silent as Marco carefully placed his old phone on the table. "Before you make your decision about the layoffs, Ms. Mercer, there's something you need to see." No one could have predicted how those photos would change everything, or how a single father who cleaned their offices at night would become the unlikely hero who saved not just his job, but the soul of the entire company. 3 months earlier, Marco Reyes had been mopping the executive floor well past midnight, his usual shift running long because of a company event earlier that day. At 42, he wore the years on his face, each line earned through struggle and sacrifice after his wife's death left him raising their daughter Sophia alone. The janitorial position at Mercer Innovations wasn't glamorous, but it offered steady pay and health insurance critical for Sophia's asthma treatments. That night, exhaustion had nearly overtaken him when he noticed the lights still blazing from the CFO's office. Strange, since the building should have been empty. Approaching to clean, he overheard raised voices, the CFO, Robert Klein, arguing with someone on speakerphone. "Nobody's going to find out," Klein hissed. "We've already moved the funds through the shell companies. By the time the quarterly reports come out, it'll be too late." Marco froze, mop suspended mid-stroke. He'd never considered himself particularly business-savvy, but even he recognized the sound of something deeply wrong. The conversation continued, revealing details of financial manipulation that would inflate executive bonuses while justifying the upcoming, cost-cutting layoffs that had the entire staff on edge. Over the following weeks, Marco noticed more late-night meetings, document shredding, nervous whispers between executives. Using his phone's camera, he began documenting what he could: screenshots of documents left carelessly on desks, photos of meetings not listed on official calendars, recordings of conversations in empty hallways. At home, his daughter Sophia noticed his distraction. "Dad, you're doing that thing again," she said one evening, setting aside her homework. At 16, she possessed a wisdom beyond her years, partly from growing up too fast after losing her mother. "What thing?" Marco asked, trying to sound casual while poring over his photos. "When you're worried but trying not to show it." She moved beside him. "Is it about the layoffs everyone's talking about? Are they going to fire you?" Marco pulled her close. "I don't know, Mija. But something isn't right at the company." "Then do something about it," she said simply. "You always tell me to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." Those words echoed in his mind as the layoff announcement loomed closer. 300 employees, nearly a quarter of the workforce, would lose their jobs, including most of the maintenance staff. Meanwhile, the executive team was set to receive record bonuses. The night before the board meeting, Marco sat alone in the break room of the janitorial department, long after his colleagues had gone home. His uniform was freshly pressed for tomorrow, not his usual work clothes, but his only good shirt and tie, saved for special occasions. His phone lay on the table, filled with evidence that could change everything, or cost him everything. "You look like you're heading to a funeral, not a cleaning shift," came a voice from the doorway. Elena, the night supervisor, leaned against the frame. At 62, she'd been with the company longer than almost anyone, watching executives come and go while she remained. "Maybe I am," Marco said quietly. "My own." Elena sat across from him, pushing a cup of coffee his way. "You're going through with it, then? Confronting the brass about what you found?" Marco nodded, surprised. "You knew? I've cleaned executive offices for 20 years. You think I don't recognize the look of someone who's seen behind the curtain?" She sighed. "I've seen 3 rounds of layoffs in my time here. Each time, the patterns are the same: documents disappear, meetings happen after hours, executives suddenly buy new cars. why didn't you ever say anything? Elena's eyes met his, a lifetime of resignation in them. Who would listen to an old cleaning lady? My son's medical bills don't pay themselves. Sometimes survival means keeping your head down. Marco pushed his phone toward her. Take a look. It's worse than usual this time. As Elena scrolled through the evidence, her expression hardened. Dios mío. They're stripping the company bare. That's why I have to try, Marco said. Not just for our jobs, but because it's wrong. Elena reached across, squeezing his hand. You know what this might cost you? Marco thought of Sophia, of their small apartment, of her medication. I know. But what would it cost me to stay silent? To teach my daughter that principles only matter when they're convenient? Elena nodded slowly, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small medallion, St. Jude, patron of hopeless causes. My grandmother gave me this when I came to this country. Said sometimes you need someone watching over the impossible dreams. She pressed it into Marco's palm. Perhaps it's your turn to hold it for a while. As Marco closed his fingers around the cool metal, his resolve strengthened. Thank you. No, Elena said, rising. Thank you for being brave enough to do what many of us only wished we could. Elaine Mercer had only been CEO for 7 months, recruited from outside to revitalize the struggling company. Marco had noticed how she actually looked him in the eye, learned his name, asked about his daughter once when they passed in the hall. Unlike Klein and the other executives, she seemed genuinely invested in the company's people. But she was also new, surrounded by long-established executives who controlled the information she received. Which brought Marco to this moment, standing before the board meeting where the layoffs would be finalized, his heart pounding as Elaine stared at his phone on the conference table. What is this about, Mr. Reyes? She asked, her voice professional but puzzled. Evidence, Marco said, his voice steadier than he felt. Of financial fraud by Mr. Klein and others. They've been manipulating the numbers to justify these layoffs while increasing their bonuses. The CFO's face flushed crimson. This is absurd. He's just trying to save his job. See for yourself, Marco said, tapping his phone to bring up the photos. These are accounting documents I found while cleaning Mr. Klein's office. These are screenshots of emails left open on computers. And this, he swiped to a particularly damning photo, is a memo outlining how to disguise the fund transfers. Elaine's hand trembled as she picked up the phone, scrolling through the evidence. The color drained from her face. How long have you been collecting this? 2 months, Marco answered. I didn't know who I could trust. The next hours passed in a blur. Security was called, not for Marco, but for Klein and 2 other executives. External auditors were summoned. The layoffs were immediately suspended pending investigation. As the chaos swirled around them, Elaine pulled Marco aside. Why did you bring this to me today, in front of everyone? You could have come to my office privately. Marco looked her straight in the eye. Because I needed to see your reaction, to know if you were part of it or not. And because they wouldn't have been able to silence both of us at once. She nodded slowly. Smart. But dangerous. I have a daughter, he said simply. She needs to see that doing the right thing matters, even when it's scary. 3 weeks later, the company held another all-hands meeting. The financial manipulation had been even more extensive than Marco's evidence suggested. Klein and several others faced criminal charges. The layoffs were not only cancelled, but Elaine announced a company restructuring that would protect jobs and restore ethical practices. Today we're announcing some changes, Elaine began, standing confidently before the assembled employees. First, we're establishing a new ethics and compliance department to ensure this never happens again. She paused, looking directly at Marco in the crowd. And I'm pleased to introduce its new director, Marco Reyes. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. Marco himself sat stunned as Elaine continued. Sometimes the people who see most clearly are those we overlook. Marco showed extraordinary courage and integrity, exactly the values this company needs to move forward. His background may not be conventional for this role, but his character is precisely what we need. Later, as employees filtered out, many stopping to shake Marco's hand or pat his back, Sophia waited by the door, having come straight from school when he texted her the news. "I told you to do something," she said, hugging him fiercely. "But I didn't expect all this." "Me neither," Marco admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But it proves what I've always told you, one person who decides to do the right thing can change everything." That night, as Marco tucked away his custodial uniform for the last time, he found a note from Elaine in the pocket. "Thank you for showing us what courage looks like. Now help us build a company worthy of it." 6 months later, Mercer Innovations had become a case study in corporate transformation. The ethics department under Marco's leadership had implemented transparency protocols that became industry standards. Employee satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. And most surprisingly, the company's stock value had increased as investors recognized the value of ethical leadership. On a crisp autumn morning, Marco walked through the company cafeteria carrying a tray with coffee and pastries. He bypassed the executive dining area and headed to a back corner where a group of maintenance staff were gathered for their morning break. Elena looked up first, her face breaking into a wide smile as he approached. "Senor Executive graces us with his presence," she teased, making room for him on the bench. The other janitorial staff, Pedro, Luis, and Marisol, greeted him warmly but with the slight awkwardness that came from seeing a former colleague in a suit and tie. "I brought the good stuff from the executive floor," Marco said, setting down the pastries. "The kind they don't think we notice they keep for themselves." This broke the tension, and Pedro laughed. "Some things never change." Marco settled in, removing his tie and draping it over a chair. "How's the new supervisor working out?" he asked, nodding toward a young woman directing the morning cleaning crew near the entrance. "Jasmine?" "She's good," Elena said. "Strict but fair. And she actually worked her way up from cleaning, so she knows what the job takes. Unlike some people who just leap straight to executive," Luis teased, elbowing Marco. They fell into easy conversation, Marco listening more than talking, about the challenges of the maintenance schedules, about families and health concerns, about the small daily indignities that still existed despite the company's transformation. As their break neared its end, Marco reached into his pocket. "I almost forgot. Elena, I have something of yours." He pulled out the St. Jude medallion, holding it out to her. "It brought me luck. I figured you might want it back." Elena closed his fingers back over it. "Keep it. Maybe it can help with your next impossible task." "Which is?" "Making sure people like us are never invisible again," she said simply. "That's harder than exposing one scandal." Marco nodded, slipping the medallion back into his pocket. "Actually, that's partly why I came to find you all. The board approved my proposal for an employee advisory council, with representatives from every department and level. Real decision-making power, not just suggestions." He looked around the table. "I was hoping some of you might be interested." The group exchanged looks, surprise, skepticism, and then something like hope. "You're serious?" Marisol asked. "They'd listen to us?" "About what?" "Everything from working conditions to business decisions. The people who keep this place running should have a say in how it runs." Marco stood, picking up his tie but not putting it back on. "Think about it. We need voices like yours, people who see everything and understand what others miss." As he turned to leave, Elena called after him. "You know what people are saying about you, Marco? That you never really stopped being a janitor. You're still cleaning up messes, just bigger ones now." Marco smiled. "Best compliment I've ever received." In his new office, still modestly decorated but a far cry from the janitorial closet, Marco kept a framed photo of himself in his old uniform, arm around Sophia. Beside it sat his old phone, now retired but preserved as a reminder of how small actions could lead to profound change. When Elaine stopped by his office one evening, she noticed him looking at the photo. "Do you miss it? The simplicity of before?" she asked. Marco considered this. "Sometimes. But I don't miss the feeling that nothing I did mattered." Now Sophia sees that standing up for what's right isn't just something we talk about, it's something that changes lives. Elaine smiled. "You've changed this company, Marco. Not just by exposing what was wrong, but by showing us what's possible when we value every voice." As she left, Marco turned back to his computer where he was drafting guidelines for the company's new scholarship program for employees' children. The first recipient would be announced next week, a bright young woman named Sofia Reyes, who planned to study business ethics and corporate responsibility. From overlooked janitor to respected executive, Marco's journey reminded everyone that worth isn't measured by title or salary, but by the courage to stand up for what's right, and that sometimes, the most important people in an organization are the ones we see but never truly notice. Until they slam a phone on the table and change everything. The truth had trembled in the CEO's hands that day, but the courage it took to reveal it had built something unshakable. If this story moved you as much as it has moved others, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of everyday heroes who remind us that courage and integrity can change not just companies, but lives. We all have moments where we must choose between what's easy and what's right. What choice will you make when your moment comes?